Good afternoon and welcome to this panel on cyber warfare and how technology is changing the battlefield. And I'm joined by an expert panel of people. First of all, we've got Sarah Armstrong-Smith, who is the Chief Security Advisor in Europe for Microsoft, which plays a key role in cybersecurity. We've also got Nigel Inkster. He had a long and distinguished career at Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. And last but definitely not least, we have Sally Walker, who spent about 25 years in national security, ending up as Director of Cyber at GCHQ. And she led the effort to create the National Cyber Force, which is a fundamental part now of UK cybersecurity, both offensively and defensively. We're also going to be joined by a minister from Ukraine in a few minutes. But I thought to start off with, given that the war in Ukraine is so current in our minds, and cyber has played such a fundamental role in that conflict, and we're learning so much all the time, that I'd ask the three of you, starting with Sarah, just what part has cyber played in the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. What we're seeing now is a real example of a hybrid war. So we're used to thinking about war as the physical, kinetic war that we get to see on the television. So we see the missiles when it's land, sea, and air. But the cyber element is the invisible element, and that's kind of one of the key areas where we talk about hybrid war. So when we have the kinetic war, we have cyber attacks exactly at the same time. And this is a prime example, particularly when we talk about Ukraine. So as the tanks were rolling in on the 24th of February, actually the first strikes were the day before, on the 23rd of February. And Microsoft, in particular, detected over 300 simultaneous cyber attacks. And this was really trying to knock out as much as Ukraine's critical infrastructure as quickly as possible. So this is in communications, it's media, it's digital infrastructure. And it's really, the hybrid war is trying to stop the war as quickly as possible. So we've seen a massive increase in cyber attacks. The other element of a hybrid war is the information warfare as well. And this is the psychological warfare, if you like, in terms of how they manipulate the general population. So they're targeting the Ukrainian population, the Russian population, Western allies, but also allies of Russia. And there's a whole disinformation campaign. I'm sure we'll touch into that as well as we get further into the panel.
Yeah, it's really important to understand, isn't it, that warfare isn't the conventional bombs and bullets alone anymore.
Exactly.
So, Nigel, what's your thoughts about the war in Ukraine and how cyber is playing a part in it?
Well, I think I would say yes. Everything that Sarah's just said, I agree with. But I think the lesson I'm taking from this is that ultimately cyber plays an ancillary role, a very important role, and in sometimes a vital role. But it's probably its utility is probably in the kind of grey zone area that precedes actual armed conflict, and as Sarah said, in the information warfare domain, targeting populations around the world and trying to persuade them of the validity of Russia's message. And while that may not be working terribly well in our part of the world, in what they call the global south, it is actually working rather effectively. So there is that. The other thing that we're seeing now is actually Russia's decided that rather than take out infrastructure using cyber means, it's easier just to physically destroy it. So the physical aspects of connectivity are also critical in this space. The other thing I would say, and we're seeing this now, is the criticality of good air defense systems, which are dependent upon satellites, artificial intelligence to function effectively.
Sally, I'm going to bring you in after we've spoken to our guest from Ukraine, because it'd be great to actually get your analysis on what he has to say. We're going to be speaking now to George Dubinsky, if technology survives. There he is. Thank you ever so much. He is Ukraine's Deputy Digital Transformation Minister, right on the physical front line and absolutely the virtual front line. Minister, thank you ever so much for joining us here at Big Ideas Live. Can you just give us a sense from your perspective of how cyber is playing a role in this war in your country? How fundamental a role is that?
Good afternoon, Deborah. Thank you for having me. And I heard just very wise comments from my colleagues, and I share them in general. But I would add a few things. Exactly, cyber became one of the dimensions of this hybrid warfare, together with information warfare. So kinetic cyber information constructs this war, and I would say that we have ongoing the first online war, because of everyone is able to follow the war through the social media platform. And in more broader context, I would say that it's not only cyber, but I would say that we are talking about some digital security and digital resilience, because of, as my colleagues mentioned, we have cyber attacks, very critical component. We experienced more than 1,370 cyber attacks, and cyber incidents, it's more than 65,000. But also we are talking about the telecommunication infrastructure, data security, and connectivity of our citizens, their connection with the government. So some dimension of digital security, some dimension of digital resilience. So together with cyber security, the telecommunication, security of data, security of personal data, and even security of this digital connection between the citizen and the government is also construct this context of this warfare. And actually, we are actively using cyber technologies in the current warfare, particularly to counter Russian disinformation. I would say that, their disinformation is just extension of their internal propaganda and brainwashing to the external markets, and they are trying to convince the population of the world that nothing is going on and nobody died. But we are using for a particular AI technologies to identify Russian, even not soldiers, who are criminals, and to show them, to find their social profiles, and to contact their families, and to ask them to take their corpse back to Russia. So we are using this cyber also multidimensional. Unfortunately, we did not create cyber forces timely, let's say, and we were more focused on cyber security and cyber defense. But right now, we understand that we have to do more proactively in this area. Maybe it also will be part of this warfare and cyber warfare.
Oh, so you're creating your own sort of offensive cyber force, do you mean?
We decided, we had decreed to create cyber forces. It was the decision was made, I believe, last November, but we did not create them timely. They are under construction right now. So since 2014, when we had this war, then this war started, and since 2015, when we experienced very severe attacks on our energy infrastructure, we were more focused on cybersecurity and cyber protection, not on offensive. No, not on cyber offensive. And so, our understanding of this conflict and cyber dimension was shaped by on the concept of cyber defense. But as we see, you cannot fight in cyber dimension without cyber forces. So we should to work on that as well.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Minister, for joining us here and sharing your experiences right from the front line, virtually and physically, of Ukraine. Sally, what do you make of what the Minister just said there about how cyber is, this, you have to defend against it, but of course he's clearly saying you also have to be offensive, and I know you don't like those terms, but so can you just explain to us, what your thoughts are, and also more broadly, how you would describe the cyber threat.
So I think the Minister's comments just reinforced the backdrop to this conversation, which is our society is digitally dependent in everything that we do, from the classroom to the boardroom to the front line. And every decision that we make is derived from information. Whether that information is trusted or not is critical to whether we're competent, and that's whether we're competent as a whole society. So in the context of cyber warfare, yes, cyber is technology, and yes, cyber is IT, but I think it would be deeply dangerous for the debate to stop there, because cyber is completely a human challenge, a deeply human challenge. And therefore, we need to be thinking about how we build national competence, national resilience, and making sure that that competence is across the whole of our society. The debate ultimately is about who we trust, what we trust, and how we trust it. And I think that the Minister's comments really brought that home. And then looking to the future, it's a really difficult debate around the skills that we need. Do we need forces? Do we need each and every citizen in this room? And I'd argue we need everybody.
Just to say that if you do have questions to ask our panel, you can scan them on the QR code, or if you're watching on television or online, you can submit your questions on Twitter still, using the hashtag BigIdeasLive22. Sarah, just looking at the impact of the war in Ukraine in terms of the cyber attacks increasing globally, there is no geographical limitation for cyber. Have we seen an increase in the threat from cyber attacks following Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think it's really good to put it into context about what we're seeing, not just with the war in Ukraine, but globally, as you said, across every single country. Now, I will give you some visibility in terms of what Microsoft is seeing. So every single day, we collect and process over 43 trillion telemetry signals. Now, you think about the digital infrastructure, but you actually need a lot of physical infrastructure as well. And if I kind of scan the room, and everyone's using smart devices and smart technologies, that's all technology, that's all signals that's kind of giving off. Kind of how do you make sense of 43 trillion signals? Well, we've talked already today about machine learning and data analytics and trying to make sense of what's going on. But we're also actively tracking about 250 different threat actors. So we've talked already about some of the nation states, but actually there's a huge increase when it comes to organized crime. And this has been really an impact of the global pandemic. So when you think of crime, particularly street crime, you might think of like drugs and a lot of those type of things, but a lot of that's moving online because what they're identifying is cybercrime pays, unfortunately. And so you have the opportunists, you have the people. You don't really need a lot of IT skills. You don't need a lot of money. You can buy credentials, you can buy kits, you can buy all of these things off the dark web. Really, really easy to get set up. So to be a cyber criminal, it doesn't actually take a lot of effort. And that's where we're seeing the increase. And anything and everything can be monetized. I think that's a really important. So when we're thinking about cybercrime, there's a kind of illusion that people are after financial data. The reality is they're after any data. Any data can be bought and sold. And as we're talking about, the sort of people and enterprises and nations, and it's kind of to Sally's point, what are we really here to protect? We're really here to protect people, and we're here to protect data. And, when we're talking about it from a digital perspective, as time goes on and time progresses, everything and everything is going to be digitally connected in one way or another. So cybersecurity plays a role in absolutely everything that we're doing.
And that's, from our perspective here in the UK, during relative peacetime. So it's important to think about the fact that we're all basically on the front line. Anyone with an electronic device can be targeted. Nigel, can you just give your thoughts? We're talking about cyber technology more broadly and the future. How is warfare in the future going to look?
Well, we're back to Clausewitz, the difference between the nature and the character of warfare. As Clausewitz said, the nature of warfare is unchanging, but the character of warfare changes continuously. The other thing to say is, remind ourselves that warfare is a complex adaptive process, and victory normally goes to the side that proves most adaptive. So making predictions, I think, is very difficult, but there are certain things I think we can safely assume. One, as I just said, I think at the end of the day, cyber attacks, I mean, I don't like the term cyber warfare, I'm not sure what it means, nor does anybody else, is probably going to be preparatory and ancillary to the main event, which is still going to be a clash of arms. The other thing to think about is the whole challenge of autonomous systems. And the United Nations has got very exercised about this and is looking at the whole question of killer robots. But I think we're a long way from that. No serious military thinker or commander that I know about wants to find himself in a situation where artificial intelligence systems or machines are dictating the battle rhythms. And if we look at what's happened in Ukraine, the role of the human being, I think, is still fundamental. Ukrainian forces have defeated a much larger and, on the face of it, better prepared force through the skill of individual commanders, non-commissioned officers on the ground. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to eliminate that from a central role in conflict. But we do have issues. I mean, we've already got loitering munitions and drones that are capable, can be programmed to attack without first phoning home. So we've kind of crossed that barrier. How much further we go is very difficult to say.
And of course, there's been a lot of work, hasn't there, in terms of that cyber element, defending it, which is why perhaps we haven't seen such devastating cyber implications. Sally, can you just talk about what a cyber attack is? You have a lot of thoughts about how it's not about this so-called Pearl Harbor cyber event. It's far more insidious. It's about attacking our minds. What is a cyber attack? What is cyber warfare?
Oh, how long have we got?
About 2.5 minutes.
Yeah. So what is a cyber attack? I've got a phone here. We've all got phones here. It is under attack because it's getting spam emails that are trying to steal my credentials and trying to steal my information. And I'm probably the one responsible for that attack, which is why the language is so unhelpful, because I logged onto a station Wi-Fi on my way here. And I didn't think about whether it was a trusted network. And it asked me for my inside leg measurement and my phone number. And within seconds, I was getting spam text messages about COVID and about energy support payments. So the system is out there and we play into it. And even if our device is secure, our behavior is not. So anything that introduces vulnerability to the system today informs the capabilities and the options that our adversaries have tomorrow. And that is, I think, unusual about the nature of the cyber threat that we face and requires us to perhaps think a little differently and possibly change the language. And it's interesting that a lot of the early cybersecurity language was actually in terms of health, infection, viruses. And some of the lessons that we've learned from COVID are deeply relevant to securing ourselves and making ourselves safer in a cyber conflict of the future.
Well, Rishi Sunak, our new Prime Minister, is actually just visiting Ukraine at the moment for the first time. He's been meeting with the President and he's been saying about how the UK is going to be providing more weapons to help the Ukrainians. Like, what is the biggest assistance that the UK can give Ukraine to help deal with these threats in the cyber domain? Actually, Sally, if I go to you first.
Brain power. So this is a human endeavor. This is about the skills that we need, and it's about different thinking. And if you bring together brilliant people who understand telecommunications networks, devices, logistics supplies, weapons programs, you can then work with those individuals to make their systems more safe. Because if you're an engineer building something, you don't tend to think, I wonder how this can be broken. But that's what our adversaries are doing to us. They're not looking for normal use of our systems and our capabilities and our infrastructure and our information. They're looking for abnormal use. And that requires a different mindset and a different skill set. And those skills are out there. They're out there in every walk of life. So we need to bring people into this fight average person in the boardroom perhaps isn't looking for a fight, they're looking for a purpose. And I think the Ukrainians have done that particularly well in uniting around a noble cause and a trusted brand of their flag.
And just one very quick thing before I go to the audience questions. I just wanted to talk about Microsoft and how industry as well, in this evolving field where actually industry often knows more than government. It's quite a unique situation. You've got Elon Musk helping the Ukrainians with his technology. Can you just talk very briefly about the fundamental role that industry has to play in the Ukraine conflict?
I think it's a really great example, like we've been talking about, with the depth, breadth, and scale, and putting that intelligence to work. And I think one of the things that we've identified that's really important, and I would say is a benefit of everything that's happened, if you can, any good that's come out of this, is the public and private sector collaboration. So historically, when we're talking about nation-state threats, we're talking about this level of intelligence, that would have been shared with government agencies, intelligence agencies across different governments. Very rarely would that have been shared to the general public. And one of the things that we found is really, really important is to share and educate the general public as much as possible. So what you'll see from us is that we have provided early lessons learned and getting it out there, sharing it so people can make decisions about and be more educated. We talked about the fact that you're utilizing devices, you're utilizing data, you're doing all of these things. And the last point I would just sort of make is you made the point earlier, Deborah, about the strategy is different in peacetime versus wartime. In peacetime, a lot of our governments, a lot of our need is to keep our data as close to us as possible. Mm-hmm. But actually, in wartime, we need to get the data as far away as possible. And that's been a really big lesson about empowerment. Your understanding of where's my data, who's got access to it, the level of control of that data is so key and it's so important. And so the two real lessons learned that we could take away, and it's really quite simple, is we have to protect the access in and the exit out. So stop them getting access into our data, into our environments and doing all those things, and stop them getting access to the data. It's the data that they're after. So we can kind of bridge the gap on those two areas. We're going to be onto a really good thing.
Thank you. So now we're going to some questions from the audience and online. Is Sam here in the audience, please? Raise a hand, maybe Sam, don't be shy. Oh, there, a cup at the back.
There's an adage that militaries always try to fight the last war, and I'm wondering if there's an equivalent of that within cyber, by which I mean an area of cyber that it might be tempting for, say, the UK military or government to focus on, which perhaps it shouldn't do, in favour of something else. Thank you.
Sorry.
Who wants to take that?
Sorry, can you just repeat the essence of the question?
Yeah, there's an old adage that militaries always try to fight the last war. Yeah. Is there an equivalent of that within cyber warfare? Nigel, why don't you go for that?
Well, a very good question. I think actually the reality is that militaries are still struggling to come to terms with the integration of cyber capabilities into their current practices. So I don't think there is a second war to be fought. We're still fighting the first one, so to speak. And this has been quite difficult because in the nature of things, people want to stick to what they know. And it has been really difficult, I think, to get a lot of military commanders to accept the necessity of integrating these capabilities into other ones with which they are more familiar. That's not a criticism all, because some have been very visionary and forward-thinking in the way that they've approached this. But integrating it has been difficult. So we're still in the first phase here.
Absolutely, and empowering. You can empower a soldier to fire a rifle, but empowering a soldier to send a tweet seems to be beyond the Ministry of Defence quite often, which links quite nicely to the next question from Alison in the audience. At the front here, please.
Hi, thank you. What role do you think social media plays as you say, an auxiliary in war, with Ukrainian soldiers now posting TikToks of themselves on the battlefield, in terms of maybe proliferating information or putting potential rallying power in the hands of the ordinary citizen?
Sally, do you want to go for that one?
Yeah, it's obviously a very powerful tool, and we've talked about Ukraine and them having their noble cause and their trusted brand to rally troops. But but that has equally been used on the flip side by ISIL, who did the same thing with their black flag and their recruitment of people to their cause, reaching around the world into the bedrooms of those who perhaps accepted their twisted ideology. And, that is a different war we fought at a different time, but actually the lessons are similar as we look into Ukraine and look to the future.
And did you have any thoughts on that, on social media?
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to what I said at the beginning about information warfare and disinformation. Now, social media is a great tool to be able to amplify, to see what's going on, to get those messages out there. It can also be used for nefarious purposes. So one of the key lessons learned from this hybrid war is that disinformation. It's the false news, it's the fake news, and how that's being proliferated across social media. And its design is to elicit a response with regards to, if you're trying to get people to fear what's going on, or you're trying to build a particular narrative about, the different areas, depending on where you'll come from. And so it's very highly targeted. And this is actually a big area of focus for Microsoft as well going forward, in terms of how we can educate. How do we educate people to understand the original source of the picture? So a lot of pictures can be doctored. A lot of pictures that you're seeing right now are not even from the Ukraine war. They could be from a war X number of years ago. It could be something that someone's created. And so when you're watching this and you're sharing this, you need to make sure that, again, that from an education perspective, that what can Microsoft do and other big tech companies to help you understand the original source, the true source, where you can go to get educated, find out real information, and like Sky News, for example, but also just potentially where that image may have been doctored and where that image may have been reused elsewhere. So it's an important thing. It's a really great question about how social media is a really powerful tool, but can also be used as a real negative tool as well.
Well, thank you very much to the panellists for this fascinating discussion. We could go on all afternoon, but there's a lot more here at Big Ideas Live.